Well, good evening or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. And thank you for joining us for another edition of STEM Chats. Today, we're very pleased to have Kate Fowle with us, the Director of MoMA PS1. Thank you for joining us today, Kate. Well, before we begin the session, I'd like to share some quick housekeeping methods. Please do note that we'll be recording the session today, and we'll also be taking questions at the end of the session. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Well, let me begin by introducing Kate. Kate Fowle is the director of MoMA PS1 in New York, a position she started in September 2019. And prior to this, she was the inaugural chief curator at the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art in Moscow, a position she has held since 2013. Well, she was also director at large of Independent Curators International in New York, where she was the executive director from 2009 to 2013. And even earlier, from 2007 to 2009, and this was when I first got to know Kate. She was the inaugural international curator at the Ullens Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing. Well, naturally, she has curated many exhibitions, and some of Kate's recent projects include the Garage Trinale of Russian Contemporary Art in 2017, which she founded, as well as exhibitions with Louise Bourgeois, Rick of Venetia, David Adje, and Urs Fischer. Thank you again for joining us today, Kate. Well, I want to start our conversation on the role of art and museums. Well, there has been much discussion on the role of art museums in recent years. ICOM, the International Committee of Museums, that's part of UNESCO, is proposing, not without controversy, a new definition of museums, moving away from the traditional understanding of the museum's roles in acquiring, conserving, preserving art and education, towards a much more expanded role of museums as inclusive, polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue, addressing conflicts and challenges of the present, and also to contribute towards upholding human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary sustainability. Well, given that you've worked in many countries from China to Russia and now the United States, how do you think this new understanding of art and museums resonates in the various contexts that you've worked in?
Could you tell me a little bit about the controversy with this ICOM, the question of why it shouldn't be around social justice and inclusion, and what's the controversy?
Well, ICOM, as you know, is not just for art museums. Within ICOM, there's CMUM, which is for modern and contemporary art museums. But ICOM is for museums of all types, from your natural history museums to anything you can think of. And some of them feel that these issues that the ICOM president was trying to push for had no relevance for them. And they're more comfortable with the traditional idea of the museum as being one for collecting, preserving heritage and history.
You see, this is what's interesting, because if you go back to when the concept of the museum was first created, it's a 19th century construct.
Yes, from the West.
From the West, and it's the whole idea of like taking care of, at the time, taking care of collections, taking care of people's manners, it was very much a kind of top-down pedagogical as you say, preservation model, like for the good of the people. And I think it's interesting because most things we've updated since the 19th century, most institutional structures. If we look at what it comes out of in terms of the way in which public health systems were being structured, the way in which school systems, the way in which all of the systems that are part of our modern society, pretty much all of those have been updated. And if they haven't been updated, that's where a lot of the issues and the troubles are coming from now, politics. And so I would say, regardless, I'm with ICOM in terms of regardless as to whether it's an art museum or a natural history museum, it's like museums need to be updated and understood not as places which can be held onto by the kind of trustees or the people who are improving themselves and kind of connoisseurs, it's not, it's for people, it's for the masses, and that's changed. Like what people need, what people want, the people we're talking about have changed.
A few questions from that, but firstly, from the different countries and societies you work with, from China and Russia, do you think they would also share this view of the role of what museums should be?
I mean, I think what's interesting in my experience, and this is when I can really just focus on contemporary art, and art in general, but contemporary art specifically, the Contemporary Museum and any of the ways in which museums have been updated, you know, is really where the idea of creating the museums in China, say, for example, I was working at the Ullens Center for Contemporary Art, this whole kind of wave in the mid-2000s of new institutions, new museums, had the ability to bypass this 19th century construct and could invent themselves in ways that they felt were important for the moment. The same is true in Russia, in Moscow, when I was working at Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. It's, we didn't have to be beholden to the 19th century traditions. We could take what was good and interesting about them, but we could step straight into the kind of the 20th century. And the 20th century model of museum, that's when the Museum of Modern Art, the idea of a kind of specialist museum around art starts. And so it's been possible, I think, in different places around the world to have different ways in which you want to kind of pick and choose, if you like. And then it depends on the attitude and the willingness or the courageousness of the structures and the people behind those institutions, whether it's public or private, as to how far you can test out the values to really make the museum for the people in the places that they're existing in.
So they have less baggage with this, less baggage building in setting up these new museums and able to then adapt them to.
I mean, they have the potential to, you know, and so it depends then whether you want to follow the traditions, you know, that are a Western construct. If you want to follow those traditions and create the whole process that you're going to have to move through, or if you want to kind of jump into something. And it's like, I mean, we've seen it, if we think about the museum in Colombo that's just opened, the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Colombo. I mean, they're trying to, like, you know, because of scale, because of the resources that are available, it's like, it's not possible to have all the scenarios that make up the 19th century museum. So, I mean, with the National Gallery, with Sam, you know, it's a different scale, it's a different structure. So,
no,
what would you say?
Sorry, go on.
What would you say in terms
I was just
of?
going to say that, you know, when, as you rightly said, you know, museums started in the 19th century in the West, but the idea behind the establishment of these museums was a very noble one, to bring the cultures of the rest of the world to that certain location. I mean, how they went about getting the collection was another matter, right, which you all know. But it started with a very noble intent to, in a sense, raise the awareness of cultural diversity within the place the museum was set up. But somehow, in recent years, as you just said, the museum hasn't really evolved, and it has come to signify certain very structured ways. And
I think the word noble is a very fitting one, because it's of a time when there is the aristocracy, where the masses, you know, it's a time when, you know, many people didn't have rights. You know, many people didn't actually have the ability. So there was this kind of top-down attitude towards taking care of publics. You know, the public were the people who couldn't necessarily take care of themselves. So.
Right, well, let's move on to the pandemic, which we're in the midst of. So the pandemic and the lockdowns around the world has changed the way many museums are operating, have been used to operating. And in many ways, highlights the value of art and museums, I think. Within the art world, we've seen art fairs, biennales being canceled, sometimes moving online. But in many cases, the platforms for artists to present their work and to sell their work have been removed, leaving many without income. And for museums and the non-profit sector, the dearth of visitorship and the resulting loss of revenue has led to reports of some museums having to close permanently, many having to lay off staff as well. But it's also exposed a certain reliance on big business that supports much of this sector, especially with dwindling government and public funding in many countries. The situation has highlighted a reliance on the networks of power and influence that underlie our neoliberal societies, and the effect that this has had on the operating logic of our museums. We see this through the constant pressure that museums have to grow our visitor numbers and through blockbuster exhibitions and ever popular programs. And so this has also highlighted the value of art and also how the value of art and museums are perceived in our societies. It's interesting to note that a survey done by our national newspaper about a month ago revealed that the public in Singapore felt that artists were the most non-essential workers during this time, which, as you can imagine, has led to much debate in the artistic world. So you took over PS1 just months before the pandemic kicked in. How has this affected PS1?
I mean, in every way possible. But before we go into PS1, it's very interesting that a poll was taken that even asked about artists.
Well,
It's pretty forward thinking to like say that artists are out there and are they essential or not? I haven't heard of that anywhere else.
I think it wasn't about artists, but it was rather being an artist was one of the occupations that was kind of listed in this list of answers on essential workers or non-essential workers, and artists came up top. Yes.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, as you say, I took on PS1 in September, and then we closed temporarily for 2 weeks on Friday, the 13th of March. So it's interesting to go back into the building now. I've gone in I've gone in with an epidemiologist, with a doctor, and with some of the staff working out how we will reopen. And you can see people just put their things down, planning on, I mean, everybody was quite excited at having a couple of weeks off because work is hard and pressured. And now this is week 22. So, and in the United States, for those who are watching in now that kind of don't know the intricacies of the very complex system in the United States, there are phases as to when you can go back, and it's done state by state. And so phase 4 in New York was phase 4 started on July 20th, and that was when museums were slated to be reopening. And the governor, Cuomo, announced that phase 4 would start on July the 20th, but no more indoor entertainment was going to open alongside. In the same way that in phase 3, he said that restaurants could open outside but not inside. And so there were kind of adjustments. So at the moment, there are adjustments to the way in which the phasing is working. And I have to say that it's been incredible seeing how New York has gone from being, unbelievably hard hit and, devastating, just listening to the ambulances, the helicopters, day, night, it's just horrendous. And now New York is under control, as a lot of the rest of the country is now suffering extremely badly. And so, the city and the government are trying to take it slow and understand when it is going to be safe. But what it's done is it's put museums that are originally in a very difficult situation in terms of those who particularly rely on income from visitors are in an extremely, extremely difficult situation. And now, without knowing when to reopen, I am sure that people are going to have to look at further layoffs, further reductions in budgets, further losses. And so 22 weeks into this 2-week closure that started at the beginning.
And still no end in sight.
It's getting more complicated, not less complicated in many ways. when we think about the artists, that's when it becomes, because institutions are institutions. There are people that work in institutions. There are ways in which we need to ensure that people can keep their jobs as much as possible. Or, I mean, ideally, everybody keeps their jobs. But with the kind of precarity of having a practice as an artist, the interdependencies that you have with that, both in terms of often you'll be working in a job that isn't necessarily related to your practice. It's like the different ways in which, the different threats to your income and to your ability to be able to practice as an artist is just horrendous.
How do you think museums and institutions are supporting artists during this time, if any of them are?
Let me talk, I mean, should I explain a little bit about what PS1 is? Do you think people know? So PS1 was started in 1976 by a woman called Alana Heiss, and it basically came out of the alternative space movement that was in existence in New York at that time. So it's in an old schoolhouse. And
that's where the name comes from, public school.
Yes, PS1 is public school number 1. It's in Long Island City in Queens, which is one of the boroughs of New York. And so it has had many, many, many lives. It's an institution that could have gone under in different ways at different times. It's always been struggling financially. Just like Long Island City, it's important to understand that when PS1 opened in the 70s, Long Island City was basically an industrial part of Queens. It's just over the river from Midtown Manhattan. Now on the subway, it takes like 12 minutes to get from PS1 into Midtown. But it wasn't a place that people would really go to. It wasn't a place where anything really was in terms of entertainment or nightlife or bars. I mean, it was a very small population in terms of who lived there, and it was an industrial hub. Now it's the largest growing neighborhood in the United States of America. And the rapid shift in how many people are actually kind of moving into Long Island City has completely changed where PS1, if you imagine PS1, this schoolhouse sitting there, it's like, and if there was a time lapse, you would see all of these changes going around it. And PS1, since the 70s, has been this old schoolhouse building, sometimes with lots of holes in the floor and the roof, and other times they're being fixed and then they fall apart again. And it's like, it depends on the cash flow and how much money is coming in. So then in 2000, that's when Alana Heiss, who was the founder, as I said, struck a deal. Like Glenn Lowry, the director of the Museum of Modern Art, and Alana worked out how to create an affiliation between PS1 and MoMA. And so it's now 20 years that there has been this relationship between MoMA and PS1. And this has taken different forms and has changed over time. So 10 years ago, we became MoMA PS1. The word MoMA was put on the front. And people now have gone, it's always described as an organic relationship between the two museums. You have what is like $180 million budget institution with an $11 million institution going into coronavirus or the pandemic, or however we want to say it. So so there's all sorts of, PS1 is also part of the city structure. So it's what's known as a CIG, a cultural institutions group. And so we are one of, I think it's 38 institutions, everything from the Metropolitan Museum, that's a CIG, to the Botanical Garden, to, Brooklyn Museum, many places that the city wants to preserve so that the public. So in Queens, the Queens Museum is one, and in Long Island City, we're the CIG.
You do get some funding from the
yes,
government.
So at the moment, we get around 10% of our funding from MoMA and around just under 10% from the city, and then we raise the rest. And we have an incredible board of trustees, and like the majority of the money that we can guarantee comes from that board of trustees. It's a long explanation of PS1, but I think it's good to understand the context, because we are a very nimble organization. And if you ask, when I first started, I asked the staff what they thought was most important about PS1. I asked all of the board, and without fail, artists come first at PS1. Supporting artists, the word artist-centered or artist-centric is kind of the DNA of PS1. So when you ask me about how museums have been supporting artists during the pandemic, I think it's in the United States, it's too difficult to say. Within New York, it depends on the umbilical cord, like the connectivity to artists, whether, PS1 doesn't have a collection. It has a second skin in the building where there are artworks everywhere that have been there for years, that have been kind of left over the years. So you always feel like artists are in the building and they're present, but there's no collection. We have a James Turrell on the top floor that opens up. It's one that kind of looks up to the sky, but that's on MoMA's collection. So artists and the way that they think, the way that they see the world, what it is that they need is at the heart. So during the pandemic, we have to turn to artists. It's like we didn't have much of a digital presence before, because we're kind of swallowed up in MoMA's website, and MoMA has very different needs and ways of responding to this than PS1. So now we have a blog called PS1homeschool.org, which is like, we took a blog that had kind of died in the internet from years ago, and we've repurposed it, the old PS1 blog. So there you can see everything that we've been doing, and we've been doing a lot of trying to put money into artists' hands and support what it is that they are doing. So a lot of mutual aid projects, looking at artists who are supporting their own communities. Or there's a series called Cooking with Artists, where our chef in residence, Minna Stone, has been talking to artists about their cooking during the pandemic, sharing recipes. There's a number, you'll see on the PS1homeschool.org, you'll see all the various ways in which we've been supporting artists. And then talking to them, because, we can't do anything in the building at the moment, but we certainly have a lot of ways in which we're trying to think about how to disperse finances, disperse power, amplify people's voices, and really kind of flatten this, completely different to this 19th century way of thinking, from the beginning of the museum. It's my board, Agnes Gund, has just stepped down as the chairman of the board last week, but she read this incredible statement that she is making around diversity and social justice in museums, and is saying it's like we are responsible for the communities in which we exist. We can't just close our eye to what is around us.
Well, that's great. Well, here in Singapore, together with the National Gallery, Sam has just launched an initiative where we reached out to other institutions in Singapore to support independent curators who then curated shows with artists, and also supported independent art spaces to do this. But all this revolves around the fact that the value of art is very much tied to what they produce and what they can produce, and hence this is the only way to support them right now. And hence I think that's why I said the notion of the value of art is coming under question as well. How do you kind of consider what artistic value is if there is no platform for it to be kind of presented and consumed or sold?
Yeah, and it's interesting about it's different because I think people can see art in Singapore, can't they? They can actually go and see it, whereas
they can. Yeah, we had a sort of lockdown for about 2 months, but now museums are reopened.
Yeah, and so in New York, it's incredible. Some people have gone to other places now, and they're sending pictures on Instagram. It's like, I've just walked into a museum. It's like the physical experience of being in the presence of art is something that I think, the longing for it shows that it's not redundant. It's like we might say all sorts of things about the institutional structures that house and keep this kind of thing, you know, called art together, but you know, the works itself, and that I know some places have been trying to do online exhibitions and for us it's like, no, we have to work directly with artists and support them, because it's like, still can't get my head around. I mean, it's good to be able to see it, but it's more like a kind of education that it is when you have that physical, you know, it's like the whole question of whether art has an aura. It's like we can discuss what that is these days, but there is this aura that is really important, I think.
Yes, so during the early days of lockdowns around the world, all museums started going online with their programs, exhibitions, and there was talk of whether this was going to be the new normal, that everything was going to be online, and whether physical exhibitions were going to have the same power and attraction once we reopened.
Mm.
And I guess we'll just have to wait and see some more.
I mean, what's interesting is that at PS1, when we talk about the future, we still have an imagination enough to believe that there is a future in the schoolhouse that we love. But now we definitely talk about online and on-site, and we know that we're going to have to keep this online, on-site. I learned yesterday from one of my staff, Victoria, who runs the social media and has become the person that is really, like, along with Molly Curzius in communications, they've really developed this digital platform very, very quickly. But so Victoria taught me yesterday that it's like IRL is in real life, and then URL. So it's like between IRL and URL. So I'm in with the 21st century slowly.
Because I think that's the one effect that COVID has done, is to increase the capacity of museums to kind of start doing online programming and having a presence in a digital form.
And what excites me is, like, with this is that I've always, you know, as you said, I've worked in China, I've worked in Russia, I come from the United Kingdom, or from England, I come from, but, you know, I've always had an interest in what is happening in different places around the world, and particularly with emergent voices. And through my work at ICI, Independent Curators International, you know, I've been pretty up on, you know, what's happening in different places and trying to create these networks internationally. And particularly in the United States, that's often not a priority. And I do think that this potentially is a way in which it's like, it's not necessarily at the top of people's minds in New York. It's like, oh, now we can work internationally much more, but it is on mine. It's like thinking about the potential of how we can start to, not again, like with the object of art in front of us simultaneously, but how we can connect a lot of interesting emerging voices from around the world. And it might actually become something that seems a bit more natural in the United States rather than up to now, which, you know, I have to say that I think that, you know, the United States doesn't have as much, this is to generalize the United States, but in general, it's like, because it's a very strong art center, you know, people don't spend as much time thinking about what is happening, you know, in other places.
And you think this has raised the awareness of the need to be more connected to their international peers and colleagues?
Especially with, like, the xenophobia that we're hearing on this, isn't just in the United States, but in different places, the kind of nationalisms, you know, the rising again of, like, questions around the whole kind of colonial structures that are still, we're within the residues of, or sometimes not even residue. You know, it's, you know, more urgent than ever to take advantage of the way in which museums have kind of, part of the museum has released itself into, you know, another way of being. And so what can we do with that slipstream? Take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, this brings me to the next question I want to ask. Well, the pandemic has obviously revealed the crises that have already existed in our society, such as the environmental crisis, but also all the inequalities and racism that are systemic within many of our societies. And with the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, there have been increasing calls within museums by their own staff for more diversity and inclusion within their own museums. particularly in America, I would say, right? How well do you think museums in the US are addressing this issue?
Again, if I speak on behalf of all museums in the US, I might not, might not get very far.
Or some thoughts on how museums could be addressing this better?
I mean, I can talk about what's happening in New York better. Eugene, you came on a Zoom call that is like every Friday, there's a call between directors of art museums in New York. So it's including the Queen's Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, Studio Museum in Harlem, the New Museum, MoMA, the Guggenheim, Whitney, the Met. It's like, so every Friday morning there's a conversation between the directors. And Eugene came to tell us what was happening in Singapore and like some of the ways that we could learn, because the United States is way behind. And last week, to Lisa Phillips at the New Museum and Anne Pasternak at the Brooklyn Museum said that they really wanted to look at how to create a citywide, between all the museums, kind of task group with directors and with other staff members in the museums to look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. DEAI, as it's called. In a lot of places, in New York, that seems to be the terminology that museums are using. So there is definitely a way. I mean, there are ways in which people are calling out and speaking up to the fact that they just can't take it anymore. These structures, which are from this kind of 19th century legacy, that's why I think it's important that we discuss that. You know, there are legacies that are colonial in their attitude, that are very much about the kind of lord and master, that are, you know, that are these structures whereby, you know, we are taking care of the masses, and that also taps into the way that staff are feeling. The issues of diversity within the workplace is horrendous. It's like, you know, and you know, there's a need for anti-racism training. I mean, it's not like there was not a need in February, or in February 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's just that each time, I mean, Black Lives Matter, this isn't the first time that, you know, they have gained the momentum that goes on to a national level. But, you know, we have to keep this going. We cannot let this keep slipping away and not paying attention, because people have had enough. And it's right. We have to change these systems, the structural systems, you know, that are the 19th century, of the schools, of the hospital systems, of the education system. We have to look at them, because they're not the systems that people need right now.
Have you done anything at PS1?
A lot. Which doesn't mean to say that, you know, oh, I've done so well and others, but actually the city required that the cultural institutions group, this group of organizations that the city supports, they required that they have a DEAI plan a couple of years ago. So we have a plan that is it's a 3-year plan that was developed thinking about the board and how to work with the board and shift what's happening there, and with staff. And we have a DEAI committee on staff. And we have a consultant who is an expert in this kind of work, who has worked with the board and is now working with the staff. And we're doing listening sessions, like right now, listening sessions of the staff to kind of understand. But there's also, I'm going through training. So I'm working directly with this woman who's a specialist to check myself and to understand, because it's not like, you know, particularly as a white woman, there are ways in which I have to understand the privilege and the power that I bring to it, even without necessarily understanding microaggressions or assumptions that I make, you know, and, you know, particularly a woman of a certain generation. It's like we both kind of grew up in the 1990s art world, and it's like, and so we were kind of the radicals insofar as how we wanted to change institutional structures and the way that we were thinking. But we also carry now the understanding that that's the changes that are needed, and it's not true anymore. That's more years ago than we would like to imagine. And so, you know, at the beginning, a lot of my staff wanted to connect into what was happening in other places, like in New York. And so I was talking to other institutions, and pretty much everybody was like, we need to take care of ourselves right now. We need to work out what's happening in each of our institutions, and we need to understand what the parameters are and how far we can move this. And because PS1 is a small institution, and because it's nimble, and because of the fact that actually it's programming and the staff, there is diversity within what we were doing in the first place. And there is certainly a very, very strong commitment on the part of the staff to understand how to support artists. And you'll see when you go onto the PS1 Homeschool website, we've been supporting artists who focus on like Black trans women's rights, artists who are focusing on LGBTQ. So we've been really looking at, all these various constituencies that need to be heard and need to be understood. It's like, these are people that are have been saying something to people like me for years, and it's important that we hear.
Yes, now in Singapore, this is something quite new that we're beginning to address as well, and we hope to also learn from other museums how they do it, and hopefully, yes, we can improve on this situation right now.
Well, does it exist in Singapore? Are there specialists who can help work with not just museums, but with businesses? And has that actually developed? Are there DEAI consultants that you can speak to?
Not that we know of, actually. No.
Because it's interesting, like as a society starts to, there's always ways in which people can find ways of working with it, because if you don't know, then you need somebody who understands things better, who has focused on training, who has started to understand. So it'll be interesting to see when the first consultants, because we know in Singapore there are specialists, there are people who have lived this life of inequity. So, when does it become a way in which they can actually become the specialist to start teaching or advising institutions on how to think about it?
We've started speaking to various museums around the world to see how they themselves are addressing it, because I think you're right, we have to start from within our museum and our organization. Yes. No, go on.
Well, it's interesting because I think that often the work is very, very difficult because people don't want to admit the power structures that are keeping them in the positions that they actually quite like to be in, and the safety of not taking risks around how uncomfortable it feels when people who don't think like you, don't look like you, don't want to be you, are kind of challenging. I mean, it's something that I've kind of grown up with, in the UK in the 1990s.
But also because a lot of the systemic and structural changes go beyond our organization. But we can't change the world right now, but we can start with the organizations that we're in, I suppose.
And what's interesting, it's because, we've had protests against PS1. Like when I first started, there were protests because of board members at MoMA. We actually have separate boards, but we are called MoMA PS1. And so, there's a number of different ways in which PS1 has been asked to be accountable for itself, and to don't speak out of one side of the mouth and act out of the other side in a different way. But, it's something that, I mean, I believe that this is correct, but when in talking to people, because PS1 is so small in comparison to the structural issues of the United States of America, the government, the president that we have at the moment, the whole way that systems work. And it was made clear to me by people who are far wiser than myself that, you know, because we've been looking into issues of mass incarceration. So I was speaking to people who are really focused on that work. And they were saying that cultural institutions are being targeted because there are people working in cultural institutions that actually have empathy for this situation. And so, you know, even with the kind of starting from within, it's like, it's because of the fact that cultural institutions will do this. And so if you want to create change, you know, it is still one of those building blocks of the way in which society is made up: museums, schools, education, you know, and so if the people who want change can get museums to change, there is a hope, there is a chance. It actually is our job to listen, to respond, because we may be one of the key building blocks to shift other things.
That's an interesting perspective. And I have a question that relates to that. So your recent show with Dr. Nicole Fleetwood focuses on mass incarceration, state repression, and imprisonment. This seems to be a significant shift from the experimental and artist-driven projects that we've come to recognize at PS1. Can we regard this as an international slant towards more socially engaged projects at PS1?
Yes, and with qualifier. Because the show that Dr. Nicole Fleetwood has developed, it will be the first show that we open. It was supposed to open in April, and we weren't open in April. So sorry. So it'll be the first show that we open when we are able to go back into the building. And this is an exhibition with around 45 artists who are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, or who work in proximity to the carceral system. And the qualifier, Clifford, I can see it's Clifford Lowe who has asked that question, and now it's gone.
Yes, because you've answered
it. Is that the whole point to the exhibition is to stop. Again, this is this way in which we qualify, like, who are artists and who not, in relation to what. Like, the people in this exhibition are artists, and some of them are socially engaged artists. Others are people who are really focused on painting or sculpture or video. And in doing this exhibition, actually it follows quite a long tradition at PS1 of looking into issues of mass incarceration. As the rise of the like from the 80s through particularly in the 90s and up to now, the rise of incarceration and that's a pandemic in and of itself. The inequities that have been happening as a consequence of the prison system in the United States. PS1 has worked with artists, and it's been something because there are many, many, many artists in the United States that really, really care about this, because it's horrendous. But Clifford, yes, I fully believe in opening up PS1, going back to its roots, looking to the future as to like what engagement can be, but like working with the voices of now to understand what social engagement means and how we can really accommodate various voices and amplify them through PS1.
So as an extension of that question, do you think this kind of programming is what more museums should also be looking at?
I would love it. This goes back to ICOM and the fact that ICOM would like to change the definition of museums. I believe that MAMI and CMAM and the work of ICOM, and I believe that this has to happen. We have to have these conversations. We have to we can't just take a definition from one period and think it fits for the rest of its existence, an institution's existence. I do believe that museums are for the communities that they serve, and that includes the artists, the local people, international. But I mean, I can only talk to myself, and I am 100% committed to the fact that PS1 is an institution that believes that social justice is at the heart of what museums need to be looking at right now and responding to. And I don't think it's because of COVID. I think that COVID has amplified what has been there for a long time.
was reading that I can't remember which museum it is in America, which now has a social justice curator as part of their stuff. So that's an interesting development as
But
well.
in the same way that there are now curators of the environment, or I can't remember, Hans Ulrich at the Serpentine has a, and curators that focus on digital, but like not in the same way. We're not talking about the kind of internet curator. It's much more looking at the expanded version. I mean, you can tell I'm a complete Luddite when it comes to, but yeah, and I think it's interesting because we don't want to take away from the fact that art, I'm often reminded by my staff that it's like I can be talking in this ways and I can be thinking about the expanded notion of art and intersectionality and how we can bring together sustainability, the environment, like social justice with art practice, with design, with architecture. But it is really important to also remember that there is a tradition, and I'm not talking about the canon in the Western way that cannot be penetrated, but there are traditions that are really important. This idea of the aura of the artwork, or the way in which, like, it's important for artists to make objects. It's like they don't speak, they make, or they do both sometimes. But like, it is important to remember that. But museums don't have to be one thing or for one kind of artist. It's like, we have many visitors with different experiences, different perceptions. It's like, why can't the museum have the same kind of plurality and create the same, like, ways in which there are new intersections for how we experience the world at large.
Well, you shared about how PS1 worked very closely with communities. There's a question here about the role of artists working in the community by Dee, who heads up our education team at SAM. The role of the artist working in the community can sometimes be very different from that of the artist as a celebrated individual. Could you share your insights on the role of museums in building capacities of artists in working in the community?
Yes, and I first of all have to say that when I started at PS1, there was no education department and there's no community engagement department. So what's interesting is that the perception of PS1 is that over the years, and it's because within the programming, like with things like Warm Up, which is the large music event, Sunday sessions, there are ways in which artists have really, like, PS1 is a home for artists, and many artists are speaking out about what they care about. And it's always been focused on BIPOC, on LGBTQ, on making sure that there are many different perspectives that are given through this programming. But there has not been there has been nobody who specializes in community education or education writ large. So I've said a number of times, it's like the good thing is that then there's no antiquated education system or perspectives on what community engagement needs to be. And the other good thing is that there is community around PS1. Now we have the opportunity to go deeper into that, to slow down a bit, to understand, to be considered in what we want to do. So before COVID, I brought on 2 fellows who are focused on thinking through what community engagement needs to be. And we're collaborating with MoMA's community engagement department because there's already partnerships and networks with MoMA. This is showing a good way of how PS1 can benefit from the expertise at MoMA. And so, to go back to sorry, that was very long-winded, Dee. But the one thing that is really clear is that it's the whole idea of kind of artists going into a community and then going out again. It's like there needs to be that what we're looking at is how to make partnerships with various constituencies of the community that we want to be building. The word community is also really complicated. We have to unpack it. It kind of covers up a lot. It's a bit like the kind of the social engagement. It's like, what does it actually mean? But we need to be creating partnerships, and we need to be working in parallel and alongside them. And artists are part of the team. They can often be part of the partnerships. They could be brought in for their knowledge and expertise as to how to kind of shift the way in which we need to, like, create a conversation between people, or create an opportunity. But again, I think that it's really important that it's not this approach whereby we have the knowledge, we have the interest, we will find the community, make them fall in love with art through like developing some projects, and then go, oh, thank goodness they've now come to the museum twice, so let's move on to the next community that we need to engage with. It's like, it's understanding, it's a two-way street, and it's understanding, you know, there's plenty of reasons why people don't come to our museums. And again, it comes back to let's understand some of those reasons as well, and are we prepared to change the way that the museum itself, if it wants to be part of the community, speaks in the way that the community is around it, rather than telling that community it needs to start to learn its language.
We have a question from Karen, which goes back to our earlier question about COVID. Do you think COVID-19 has exposed any weaknesses in the current art industry structure? And what about the strengths of this structure?
Yes, I mean, I've said a few times that it's like, I think COVID has opened every cupboard that we were trying to keep things hidden in. And it's like, and skeletons fall out, the skeletons of each museum falls out, and then they catch coronavirus. It's like, so we have a kind of a whole load of issues going on at once. It's like, what we do understand is that the tragedies, the deaths, the extreme stresses of like losing your job, of like financial instabilities, of like food, like instabilities, of food shortages, of not being able to feed your family. It's like, this is where it's really, really serious. And this is where, again, museums need to be understanding that if they want to be part of a community, if they are in society, sometimes it's important to understand that, like, whilst you can't change the world, as you said, Eugene, you are part of a world that you have to take responsibility for understanding, like, how you support what it needs. So, yes, it's like COVID has exposed many, many, many weaknesses, but I think that that is the strength at the same time, because things have to change. So if we can make the people in power, some of the people like who are the directors of institutions, who are the trustees, who are the people who take care of the fact that we have culture in our life, if the pandemic can be the excuse that enables them to then say, okay, let's start to think about things differently, then it's a strength. And if you like, it's the way in which the sacrifices that many, many people around us, and it is inequitable how this is hitting, how the pandemic has hit people, or how the virus has hit people, maybe that is one of the strengths. In terms of the art industry structure in general, to kind of step back from that, and what are the strengths of it? I mean, it's interesting in the United States because, on every level, auction houses are making layoffs, on every single level. And it's like, benefactors, those that support artists by buying the work, they're often the trustees that support the museums. It's like everybody's been hit. And what has come out of it is like, I don't know that there's a strength of any one part of the institutional structure. What's come out of it is artists are really important and art is important. So it's assertive, but I don't know that the institutional structures that exist right now, I don't think there's necessarily any one that we have to hang on to. I mean, we're not going to change it all overnight. It's not going to go away. I think that that's not necessarily where we're looking.
So you're hopeful that change will come and will happen because of COVID-19?
I'm hoping that if we can find a silver lining, that it can be that, yeah.
Chantal Mouffe says that the first step towards change is recognizing the reliance of the art world on the commercial sector, on the market, on the consumerist perception of art, which I think is happening as you've seen kind of markets collapsing, as you said, auction houses, fairs being cancelled. And maybe that's a start, and we can see how we go from there.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, because I don't think you remove any of those systems, because the art world is an ecosystem. And, in the same way you were saying, it's like, issues of environmentalism and, awareness. It's like, if we think of the ecosystem of the art world, it's like we can't take any one of these parts out and expect it to flourish in the same way. It's like, we need to have all of these aspects, but we need to look at how they relate to each other so that the ecosystem doesn't collapse when something else happens. So we need to understand that kind of, it's a delicate balance. And it's like, and we know that things are out of balance if things do start to collapse. So, it's that, what about the smaller commercial galleries rather than the larger ones? What about the way in which auction houses are reliant on, X rather than what? It's like, we just need to kind of work together to understand how to create that, so that ecosystem can survive. And then when you think about that internationally as well, it's like, how does the ecosystem in Singapore get affected by the ecosystem in the United States, affected by the ecosystem in Mexico? How do we start to create like interdependencies so that we can strengthen that as well?
Yep, it's interesting. I think we have time for maybe one last question. Well, there's a question for Kim, from Kim, about what the future of the art sector will look like, but I think we've just addressed that through our discussion just now. One from Jason Wee, who's an artist who works between New York and Singapore, and runs an artist-run space here called Grey Projects. Some forms of exhibitionary engagement with social justice are challenging, if not impossible, with institutions in Singapore. Okay, in part because of the state's position on issues. A colonial era law against homosexuality is still on the books that the state has refused to revoke. My question is whether PS1 has been a site from which artists elsewhere can write themselves into PS1's local struggles in order to address comparable ones outside.
Fantastic question, Jason. And the answer is yes, absolutely. And it's actually something that we've been talking about a lot recently, because there are various struggles. As you said, I mean, in this situation, we're talking about homosexuality and the oppressions that happen around that. What's important, like when I'm talking, like literally like last week, talking to the staff about, let's just say homosexuality is one topic. It's like what my staff is saying is like, Kate, we can't bunch everything in together, because I want to create this opportunity for people from different places in the world to start talking to each other, and like, let's create these different ways of kind of PS1 being the place that can kind of receive and speak out for people all over the world. And they're like, yes, we agree, but we have to differentiate. We have to explain, because the publics in the United States need to understand, as you say, the colonial era law against homosexuality. It's like there are like different fights that you are having, Jason, to some of the ways in which the fights are happening, and if you go between New York and Singapore, so you understand that. It's like, so it's important to find ways of bringing people together, of providing opportunities for people from different places around the world, but also explaining the context of what the issues are, because it's much stronger in Singapore, for example, in this case, than in New York, with what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and what is permitted, what is prohibited. So, because I think there's a lot of ways in which people in the US have no idea what's, because the land of the free, the democracy, it's like they know that there are people being oppressed all over the world, but it's like the specificities and the nuances. I think it's really important for people to start understanding what situations people are having in different places.
Oh, with that, I think we've come to the end of our talk tonight.
9 o'clock on the dot.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for joining us tonight and for sharing these interesting perspectives and insightful perspectives. Wish you all the best with PS1 and with the eventual reopening. And I hope to see you when it's possible again. But thank you.
Exactly. Thank
and
you very much.
To welcome you back to Singapore as well once travel becomes possible.
Yes, I would love that.
And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you and good night.
Bye.